Looking to add the most impressive power upgrade you can to your FJ Cruiser? Look no further than the Supercharger. Hey there everyone, welcome to FJX 2000 Productions and another episode of Let's FJ. My name is Hayden, and today we will be diving into the world of performance upgrades for the FJ Cruiser, specifically the coveted Supercharger. The market has several types of superchargers to choose from, as well as other notable performance upgrades one can add to their FJ Cruiser to increase horsepower and torque. And in this video, we will be covering all of them. But I am excited to announce that this is only part 1 of my Supercharged FJ Cruiser series, so be sure to subscribe and tune in for part 2, because in that video, I will be putting my own FJ Cruiser without a supercharger head-to-head against a supercharged FJ, so we can see firsthand what kind of difference they make. There are no other videos on YouTube that truly show how they compare, so you're not going to want to miss it. Before we begin, I want to thank all of my subscribers for all the support you give my channel, and I want to announce that I now have an Instagram account dedicated to my FJ Cruiser. Just search for FJX 2000 and you can find photos and videos of my FJ's builds and journeys. Plus, I will post updates on upcoming videos on the channel. You can also send me messages on there if you have questions about FJs, and you can send me photos and videos of your FJ Cruisers if you want a chance of seeing them appearing in future videos on the channel. But as always, if you enjoyed today's video, leave it a like, and comment if you have a supercharger or any of the mods mentioned in today's video. But anyways, let's get started. The Toyota FJ Cruiser for the 2007 through 2009 model years came with a 1GR-FE 4-liter V6 engine that produced 239 horsepower and 278 pound-feet of torque. And for 2010 and newer models, Toyota upgraded the FJ with another version of the 1GR-FE, but this one is notable for having a new dual or double variable valve timing with intelligence (VVTi) system and new roller rockers, all of which helps improve airflow, prevent obstruction, and improve efficiency. This ultimately means for 2010 and up models, the horsepower increases to 260, while the torque drops to 271 pound-feet. So whether you have an earlier or later model FJ engine, the engine specs are pretty similar, only differing by 21 horsepower and 7 pound-feet. It is worthy to note that these specs are measured by Toyota directly out of the engine off of the crankshaft, meaning it is crank horsepower, CHP, as opposed to wheel horsepower, WHP, where the horsepower is measured at the wheels. Also note that for earlier FJs, those specs were achieved using 91 octane fuel, and later models got their readings with 87 octane. Toyota does recommend the use of higher octane fuels for more demanding driving situations, like towing, off-roading, or general driving at higher elevations. But just keep in mind that there is a lot that can influence the specs of an FJ if you were to go out and get your own FJ dyno tested, especially as most testing gives you the wheel horsepower, not the crank horsepower. Now for most people, the OEM specs of the FJ Cruiser are perfectly acceptable and allow for plenty of power in most situations, both on and off-road. But for others, an increase in power can be very beneficial or even necessary, depending on what they use their rig for. Some modifications offered from Toyota did advertise increased power gains, including the Toyota Racing Development, or TRD, cold air intake, of which there were 2 versions. The first generation cold air intake, abbreviated as CAI, was developed by AFE and boasted a 13 horsepower and 21 pound-foot of torque gain. The second generation TRD CAI was developed by K&N and made slightly less power, at plus 11 horsepower and plus 19 pound-feet. Then there was the TRD catback exhaust system, designed to have a less restrictive path and reduced back pressure for exhaust, helping the FJ to make an advertised increase of 5 to 8 horsepower depending on the application. These gains, if true, are definitely something to look into, as they not only increase your FJ's power, but they also make the engine sound better, with a throatier and more powerful tone. Keep in mind, however, that there are tons of intakes and exhaust systems on the market from various companies that advertise various levels of increased horsepower and torque, or even additional features. So do your research to find what works best for you. But if you want a real power upgrade, then look no further than the almighty Supercharger. A supercharger is an engine modification that uses the engine's own power to force air into the cylinders. Since engine power comes from varying levels of air and fuel mixtures being ignited, if you can increase the amount of air forced into your engine and increase the amount of fuel injected simultaneously, you can make more horsepower and torque. Usually, supercharger systems are mounted in such a way that the use of a longer engine belt can then drive the blower rotors, and this is what force feeds the engine with additional air. Since the engine's own power is needed to make this happen, these require a degree of power expenditure, known as parasitic loss. But high-quality systems reduce this loss and make up for it in the amount of power gained. I recommend checking out this video by Donut Media if you need a better understanding of how superchargers and turbochargers work, but I will do my best to simplify it here. The most famous of the FJ Cruiser superchargers is probably the iconic TRD Supercharger, made by Magnuson Superchargers for the 2007 to 2009 FJ Cruiser. Released in late 2007, this model of supercharger produces 304 horsepower and 334 pound-feet of torque, a 65 horsepower and 56 pound-feet increase over stock. The TRD Supercharger also makes 5 to 6 psi of boost pressure and utilizes a Roots-type supercharger with rotating components made by Eaton. How it works is air gets sucked into the intake through the engine air filter. It travels through the throttle body and enters the supercharger, where the rotors then compress the air and force it through an intercooler. Since the compression of air heats it up, the intercooler cools it down before it enters the cylinders. The principle being that cold air means dense air, which means more oxygen molecules that can burn, and thus more power. The intercooler in the supercharger is connected to its own loop of coolant that has a reservoir, pump, and heat exchanger, also called a low-temperature radiator. The coolant circulates in this system and provides the cooling necessary for the supercharger to work optimally. The kit also comes with new fuel injectors that allow for the necessary additional fuel to be added. So with both the extra air and extra fuel in the engine, this is how you make more power. The nice thing about this style of supercharger, as opposed to a turbocharger, is the power is instant and constant throughout all RPMs. Turbochargers work a little differently and need time to spool up before increased air flows into the engine and pressure builds up. This is what is meant by boost pressure. In other words, turbochargers are known for only really making power in the top end of their power band or at higher RPMs. Meanwhile, the Roots style of supercharger makes these gains throughout the whole range of RPMs, so from the second you press the pedal, you've got more horses with no lag. Now, while most people probably bought and installed their TRD superchargers themselves, or at least had a shop do it, some lucky folks in the early days bought their brand new FJ Cruisers with them already installed. The common consensus is that the dealerships were the ones who did the installs of the superchargers, as there is no record of Toyota installing them at the factory. Still neat though that some owners have had superchargers on their FJs from day one. TRD offered this supercharger until they discontinued their supercharger program in 2015. This came at the dismay of FJ owners, since TRD had been in various stages of development for the long-awaited 2010 Plus supercharger. We even got a glimpse of this 2010 Plus supercharger on the 2013 FJS Cruiser concept that debuted at FJ Summit in 2012 and at SEMA later that same year. Folks got excited that the newer supercharger was coming, but it never made it, and no 2010 Plus TRD superchargers were ever sold. To learn more about the FJS Cruiser concept, check out my Special Editions Part 2 video, link in the description below. Luckily, since Magnuson acquired or still had the rights to produce the Superchargers after the deal ended with TRD, they were able to continue producing the 07 to 09 Superchargers under their own name, with everything being the same as the TRD version, just without the TRD logo. And, to everyone's surprise, Magnuson finished the development and testing required to make the 2010 Plus FJ Supercharger a reality, and now you can easily find them for sale, even directly through Magnuson. We can see it is the same design they had been developing with TRD, but now the Magnuson logo replaces the TRD one. They call this 2010 and up model the Magnuson Roller Rocker Supercharger, and it has a 30% horsepower and 28% torque increase over factory specs, meaning it produces 335 horsepower and 345 pound-feet of torque. That's a 75 horsepower and 74 foot-pound difference. This means this supercharger is even more powerful than the previous model. This supercharger works the same way as the other one does, but do note that for both superchargers, retuning of the vehicle's ECU is required. Magnuson even sends you a specific tool with calibration instructions for your particular build, taking into account if the FJ is two-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, what performance or non-performance mods you have installed, the exhaust, the tire size, the gear ratio, and even if you use the vehicle as a daily driver, a weekend warrior, or just for shows and promotional purposes. Note that once this level of performance mod is installed, you can no longer run lower octane fuels, as 91 octane fuel is required going forward. And as with any other part on the vehicle, maintenance of additional parts and pulleys does have to be taken into consideration. I will link a forum thread below that has tons of helpful information about servicing these superchargers, but TRD claimed its supercharger can be service-free for 100,000 miles. In reality though, there are still things you should probably check on more frequently, like the belt, coolant levels, and coolant pump. There are even things like the nose or snout oil that should be changed every 30,000 miles, and the coupler bearing may also need replacing, as it is the most common part to wear out. Eventually, the nose bearing should even be rebuilt or replaced altogether, and for the whole supercharger, rebuilding services are offered by various companies, so hopefully you can get a good long life out of your supercharger one way or the other. Now that we have gone over the Magnuson TRD style of supercharger, the other major player when it comes to supercharging FJs is Underdog Racing Development, better known as URD. URD has produced their 2007 to 2009 version of the supercharging kit for a long time, even debuting it at the SEMA Auto Show in 2006, making URD the first to develop an FJ Cruiser supercharger. But what makes them unique is they don't use a root-style supercharger like the one used by Magnuson. For 07 to 09 FJs, URD uses a Rotrex centrifugal-style supercharger, and for 2010 and up FJs, they use a Whipple twin-screw supercharger. Let's start with the earlier centrifugal-style supercharger kit. They use a supercharger made by Rotrex, a trusted brand in the supercharger community, and it looks and acts more like a turbocharger. The kit even includes a turbo-style blow-off valve, so it will sound like one too. Since it is belt-driven, there will be some parasitic loss, but centrifugal superchargers are prized for their efficiency and how less parasitic drag is present, leading to the most horsepower of any supercharger on the market. Over the years, slight upgrades have been made to their kit to make improvements or to make it more compatible with other mods. The most recent version is the third variation of this kit, called the Mark III, and it is notable from past models by now being compatible with snorkels, though they do note that the restriction of a snorkel may reduce power overall. These kits can be upgraded from a baseline version called the Stage 1 kit to a Stage 2 kit that is even more powerful. So what are the power readings, you ask? It's a little complicated. The folks at URD use a 6-speed manual transmission FJ as their development vehicle, and as I discuss in my manual transmissions video, all 6 MT FJs are full-time 4-wheel drive. Therefore, they had to dyno the FJ in high 4-wheel drive on a special 4-wheel DynoJet dyno, but they only measured the power output on the rear wheels, as you would a 2-wheel drive FJ Cruiser. In stock form, this FJ dynoed 188 rear wheel horsepower, but after the install of the Stage 1 Supercharger, they made 325 rear wheel horsepower. That's a 137 horsepower gain, smashing the numbers from Magnuson. But when they upgraded to the Stage 2 Supercharger kit, they then measured 370 horsepower, meaning 182 more horses than stock, practically doubling the horsepower. That's insane. So where does this power come from? Well, let's look at the differences in this style of supercharger kit from the one used by TRD or Magnuson. For starters, this supercharger uses an air-to-air intercooler to chill the air before delivering it to the engine, similar to a turbocharger. This means instead of the air passing through a coolant-chilled intercooler as before, this supercharger sucks up its air through the intake, passes the air itself through an intercooler behind the front grille of the FJ, no coolant required, and that air is then forced into the cylinders after it travels through the throttle body like normal. The tuning of the ECU is also different for this style of kit, but another notable difference is this kit not only comes with new high output fuel injectors, but also a whole new 255 liters per hour fuel pump. This huge addition of fuel, along with the increased air from the supercharger, is responsible for the massive horsepower gains seen in this kit. The Magnuson kit doesn't replace the factory fuel pump, so it cannot deliver nearly as much fuel to the engine. Thus, there is a limit to how much power it can make. To upgrade URD's Stage 1 kit to a Stage 2, one has to remove the catalytic converters from the exhaust, install aftermarket long tube headers, install a Y-pipe for improved exhaust flow, add their 75mm pulley, upgrade the injectors again, and recalibrate their advanced engine management system. All of that makes for a more efficient and powerful system that manages to squeeze out that additional 45 horsepower. But according to a message I received from URD, the Stage 2 upgrade isn't something they offer anymore. And if you do this yourself, there's nothing they can do about the error codes from the ECU for the missing catalytic converters. This also would probably make your FJ non-EPA compliant, so that's something to keep in mind. Now what about URD's 2010 Plus FJ Cruiser Supercharger? They call it the URD Whipple Supercharger system and currently offer it as a Stage 1 system. The actual supercharger used is a 2.3-liter twin-screw compressor made by Whipple, a company renowned for this style of supercharger. And with the URD additions like the tuning, upgraded fuel injectors, and high-output fuel pump, it makes for a kit with a max gain of 133 rear-wheel horsepower and 120 rear-wheel torque at around 5.5 to 6 psi of boost. These tests were also done on a 6MT FJ Cruiser, and though the gains aren't as impressive as the centrifugal style supercharger, it still outperforms the Roots style Magnuson Supercharger, largely in part to the upgraded fuel system. A similarity between Whipple and Magnuson Superchargers is that both utilize liquid-to-air intercoolers with front-mounted heat exchangers to get their cooler air. However, the twin screw design employed by Whipple is more efficient than the Eaton Roots rotors used by Magnuson, yet both suffer from more parasitic draw than the centrifugal style of the earlier URD Supercharger kit. A great part about all the kits mentioned so far is that they are all considered bolt-on only, no fabrication work required. With the proper tools, you can do the install in the comfort of your own garage. But if you aren't comfortable with tearing down part of your engine to install the supercharger, trusted or certified shops are the way to go. Luckily, for those bold enough to do it themselves, very detailed instructions are provided by Magnuson and URD, and they of course offer customer support, so installs should be a breeze. Even the instructions on how to recalibrate your FJ should be pretty straightforward, but professional shops that tune high-performance vehicles are also an option, especially if you want to push your supercharger system to its absolute limits. But is this all worth it? With Magnuson Supercharger and URD Superchargers running between $6,200 and $7,000 US, that's a pretty penny to be spending on power upgrades. Ultimately, if you see yourself really lacking in power for what you use your FJ for, whether that's towing, racing, off-roading, or whatever else, then perhaps the high prices are justifiable. And given Toyota's dependability, you may even consider supercharging an older or higher mileage FJ if you plan on keeping it for a long time. I've even heard of an install on a 250,000 plus miles FJ engine, though they did replace or rebuild other engine components at the same time. So you can make supercharging happen even on your older FJs, but do keep in mind that they are likely to wear out engine components faster than normal, meaning the longevity of parts or of the engine as a whole may be reduced as a result of the added performance. I will quickly go over some other superchargers on the market, but you can look them up yourself if you need more details. Links to their websites will be in the description. For Australia, Harrop makes a 2010 plus supercharger similar to the Magnuson one, but theirs is notable for its 35% power and torque increase, meaning it took the OEM test vehicle from 223 horsepower to 299 horsepower, and 221 pound-feet to 302 pound-feet of torque, at approximately 7 psi of boost. This is a 65 horsepower gain and an 81 pound-foot gain, meaning it is right there in the ballpark of the 2010 plus Magnuson Supercharger, but just a little better. Bullet, another Australian company, makes two variations of supercharger kits, one for 07 to 09 FJs and the other for 2010 plus FJs. Both are of centrifugal design, just like the early model URD one. And the actual supercharger itself is a C38 Rotrex supercharger, the same exact model utilized by URD. The 07 to 09 kit claims it can use 8 psi of boost pressure to achieve horsepower at the wheels exceeding 268, a 50% increase over their OEM measurements. And the kit for 2010 plus FJs uses 6 pounds of boost to make over 241 horsepower at the wheels, a 40% increase. ProCharger is another company that utilizes a centrifugal style supercharger, and though their kits aren't specific for the FJ Cruiser, I have seen photos of their early Tacoma supercharger adapted to work on the 2007 to 2009 FJ Cruiser. And with a system that produces 7 to 8 pounds of boost and a supposed 45% increase in power to make 390 horsepower, it's easy to see why some people put in the work fitting this onto their FJs. One forum member even dyno tested their ProCharger setup and made 382 horsepower and 369 pound-feet at 10 psi of boost. In theory, the Forerunner ProCharger kit could be adapted for 2010 plus FJs, but I have yet to see anyone go this route. RGMotorsport is a South Africa-based company I must also quickly mention, as they make a wicked-looking supercharger kit that utilizes a Vortec Centrifugal V2 SI trim supercharger. This CAD-designed kit uses a liquid-to-air intercooler system that not only has its own cooling loop, but also uses an electric fan on the radiator to ensure peak chilling of the air before entering the engine. The specs for this RGM kit give the engine at the crank a 65% power and 45% torque gain at 442 horsepower and 405 pound-feet with 7 pounds boost pressure. This translates to 295 horsepower at the wheels compared to the 178 horsepower test vehicle, meaning a gain of 117 horsepower. I'm sure that means their lowered FJ must absolutely rip down the track. finally, we have Raptor, another Aussie company which has their own style of centrifugal supercharger kit for 2010 and newer FJs that claims it can provide a 75 to 100% power gain at 7.5 pounds of boost, producing between 390 to 430 horsepower at the crank, or in other words, 255 to 322 horsepower at the wheels. Now there may be other companies offering similar superchargers to the ones we've gone over, but hopefully this covers all the major ones, and especially the common types of superchargers. But what about turbochargers? Are there any turbo kits offered for FJs? Not that I know of, but people have fabricated their own turbocharged setups on the FJ Cruiser, with one of the earliest, if not the first, being all the way back in 2007. But the community consensus is that FJ Cruisers really aren't the right kind of vehicle to be turboed, and supercharging is the much better, tried and true method for getting that additional power. Some people have even done various engine swaps on their FJs over the years, whether that's to a V8 engine or even a diesel one. But ultimately, these installs require quite extensive fabrication work to be done, and many custom modifications to be made to get everything to work as it should. So again, supercharging is the cleanest, most straightforward way to go. As mentioned earlier in the video, simpler ways to get more power aside from going full supercharger could include aftermarket cold air intakes and catback exhaust systems. But you can also look into aftermarket headers, such as those from Doug Thorley or JBA, or you could research regearing your FJ's front and rear differentials, which would help give your FJ some pep in its step, especially if you have aftermarket tires around 35 inches in diameter or greater. Another cheaper option would be adding a plug-in performance engine management system like the module from Pedal Commander. This little control box can not only alter throttle response to make your FJ more responsive and make it feel like you have a supercharger, but it also includes eco modes to help with fuel savings. Some people swear by them and others end up selling theirs, so it's really a mixed bag if it's worthwhile or not. But if you don't trust a little plug-in box for added power, companies like Overland Taylor Tuning offer services that can retune stock FJ Cruiser engines and give the FJ the extra power it needs for hauling around all the extra weight of overlanding gear, or just to be more fun. Check out the recent video from Independence Overland for more details. Hopefully this video can be an excellent start to your supercharging journey, but make sure you do your research online or even through contacting the companies directly before pulling the trigger on one. I hope you've enjoyed diving into supercharging FJs today, and if you end up going out and supercharging your FJ after this, let me know. I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Like the video if you haven't already, and remember to check out my FJX2000 Instagram account after this, where you can follow my FJ's build and adventures and contact me directly to send photos or videos of your FJ Cruiser. Thanks for watching, and be sure to tune in for the Part 2 Supercharger video where I will be racing my FJ against a supercharged one. It's going to be epic. But until then, happy trails, keep on FJ cruising, and take care.